The morning mist clung to the coral sea like a death mask as Captain Hideaki Tanaka stood on the bridge of destroyer Hayabusa. His calloused fingers traced the edges of his navigation charts, studying the convoy routes that had become increasingly perilous since the Americans had abandoned all pretense of civilized naval warfare. What Tanaka could not have imagined was that beneath the seemingly peaceful waters, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Sullivan, aboard USS Barracuda, was preparing to shatter every convention of submarine warfare that the Imperial Japanese Navy had come to expect. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The transformation of American submarine warfare from cautious, rule-bound operations to unrestricted hunting had occurred gradually, then suddenly, like a fault line finally giving way under geological pressure. Throughout 1941 and early 1942, American submarines had operated under strict peacetime rules of engagement that required surface warnings before attacking merchant vessels. These gentlemanly protocols, inherited from international maritime law and naval tradition, demanded that submarines surface, identify themselves, allow crews to abandon ship, and only then deliver the killing blow. Such civilized warfare had proven catastrophically ineffective against an enemy that showed no such restraint. Captain Saburo Nakamura, commanding the merchant vessel Akagi Maru, had grown accustomed to the predictable patterns of early American submarine attacks. The enemy boats would surface at dawn or dusk, maintaining respectful distances while signaling their intentions through flag communications or loudspeaker announcements. Japanese merchant crews had developed efficient procedures for abandoning ship, confident that American submarines would honor maritime conventions even in wartime. This mutual understanding had created a deadly complacency that would soon prove catastrophic for Japanese shipping throughout the Pacific. The strategic situation facing Admiral Chester Nimitz in Hawaii had demanded radical changes in submarine doctrine. Japanese merchant shipping continued to flow freely between the home islands and conquered territories, supplying the war machine that had achieved stunning victories from Pearl Harbor to the Dutch East Indies. American submarines, operating under restrictive rules of engagement, had achieved minimal impact on Japanese supply lines. The mathematics were brutally simple. Unrestricted submarine warfare could strangle Japanese logistics, while adherence to peacetime protocols would ensure continued enemy success. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan had received his new orders during a classified briefing at Pearl Harbor's submarine headquarters. The sterile conference room had been filled with submarine commanders who understood the implications of unrestricted warfare. No more surface warnings, no more rescue opportunities for enemy crews. American submarines would attack without warning, striking merchant vessels and warships with equal ruthlessness. The gloves were coming off in the Pacific, though Japanese naval commanders remained unaware of this fundamental shift in American tactics. The psychological conditioning required for unrestricted submarine warfare had been carefully managed through training programs that emphasized enemy atrocities and strategic necessity. American submarine crews had been briefed on Japanese treatment of Allied prisoners, the Bataan Death March, and the brutal occupation policies implemented throughout conquered territories. These briefings had transformed submarine warfare from a gentleman's profession into a campaign of maritime annihilation designed to cripple Japanese war production through systematic destruction of merchant shipping. Commander Yoshio Matsuda, staff officer for convoy operations at Imperial Navy headquarters in Tokyo, had been analyzing American submarine attacks with growing concern. The enemy boats appeared to be maintaining their predictable tactics, surfacing before attacks and allowing adequate time for crew evacuation. Japanese merchant marine officers had developed confidence in their ability to survive submarine encounters through efficient abandonment procedures. This false sense of security would prove devastating once American submarines abandoned all pretense of civilized warfare. The technological capabilities of American submarines had evolved dramatically since the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Mark 14 torpedo, initially plagued by magnetic exploder failures and depth-running problems, had been extensively redesigned to achieve devastating reliability. Contact exploders replaced the unreliable magnetic systems, while improved gyroscopic guidance enabled accurate targeting at extended ranges. These technical improvements, combined with unrestricted warfare tactics, would create submarine capabilities that Japanese anti-submarine warfare doctrine had never anticipated. Captain Hiroshi Yamamoto, commanding the destroyer escort Asashio, responsible for protecting merchant convoys through the increasingly dangerous waters between Truk and Rabaul. His anti-submarine warfare training had emphasized detection of surfaced submarines preparing to attack according to international maritime law. Japanese sonar operators had been trained to recognize the acoustic signatures of submarines running on the surface, allowing sufficient time for merchant vessels to scatter while escorts engage the enemy boats. This tactical doctrine would prove utterly inadequate against submarines that attacked without warning from submerged positions. The intelligence networks supporting American submarine operations had identified key Japanese shipping routes with precision that would have seemed impossible during peacetime. Code-breaking operations had penetrated Japanese merchant marine communications, providing submarine commanders with detailed convoy schedules, cargo manifests, and escort dispositions. This intelligence advantage, combined with unrestricted attack authority, would enable systematic destruction of Japanese supply lines throughout the Pacific theater. Petty Officer First Class Kenji Watanabe served aboard the cargo vessel Hokkaido Maru, carrying critical aviation fuel and ammunition from the Dutch East Indies to forward bases in the Central Pacific. His ship had survived 3 submarine encounters during previous voyages, each following predictable patterns of surface warning and crew evacuation. Watanabe had developed confidence in standard abandonment procedures, never suspecting that American submarines had abandoned the maritime conventions that had previously saved his life. The strategic impact of unrestricted submarine warfare on Japanese logistics would prove catastrophic beyond Imperial Navy calculations. Merchant shipping losses would accelerate from manageable monthly tonnage to devastating figures that threatened the entire war effort. Aviation fuel shortages would ground aircraft throughout the Pacific, while ammunition shortages would limit naval operations and defensive preparations. The systematic destruction of Japanese merchant marine capabilities would prove as decisive as any surface engagement or amphibious assault. Lieutenant Robert Chen, torpedo officer aboard USS Barracuda, had calculated firing solutions for dozens of merchant vessels during the early phases of the Pacific War. His previous engagements had followed standard protocols requiring surface warnings and rescue provisions for enemy crews. The new orders eliminating these restrictions had fundamentally altered his tactical calculations. Submerged attacks from optimal positions would maximize torpedo effectiveness while minimizing submarine vulnerability to escort counterattacks. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. The training facilities at Pearl Harbor had adapted their curriculum to prepare submarine crews for unrestricted warfare operations. Mock attack exercises emphasized stealth approaches and multiple torpedo salvos designed to ensure target destruction. Rescue operations were eliminated from training scenarios, while emphasis shifted to rapid escape procedures following successful attacks. These tactical modifications would prove essential for submarines operating in heavily defended Japanese waters. Captain Tetsuo Hashimoto commanded the heavy cruiser Sendai, flagship for the 4th Cruiser Division, responsible for escorting high-value convoys through Central Pacific shipping lanes. His Naval Academy training had emphasized honorable warfare conducted according to established international conventions. The concept of unrestricted submarine warfare seemed incompatible with civilized naval combat, leading to dangerous assumptions about American submarine tactics that would prove catastrophically wrong. The psychological warfare aspects of unrestricted submarine attacks would prove as devastating as their physical effects. Japanese merchant marine crews who had previously survived submarine encounters through orderly evacuation procedures would face the terror of unexpected torpedo strikes with no warning or opportunity for escape. This psychological impact would spread throughout the Japanese merchant marine, creating morale problems that would compound the material effects of shipping losses. Commander William Barnes, executive officer aboard USS Barracuda, had studied Japanese convoy procedures with meticulous attention to detail. Enemy merchant vessels followed predictable formations, with destroyer escorts positioned according to standard anti-submarine warfare doctrine. These formations had been designed to counter submarines operating under international maritime law, providing inadequate protection against boats attacking without warning from submerged positions. The systematic exploitation of these tactical vulnerabilities would prove decisive in the submarine warfare campaign. The industrial implications of unrestricted submarine warfare extended far beyond immediate shipping losses to encompass fundamental disruption of Japanese war production. Raw materials from conquered territories could no longer be transported safely to home island factories, while finished military equipment could not reach forward combat zones. This logistical strangulation would prove more effective than strategic bombing in crippling Japanese military capabilities throughout the Pacific theater. Ensign Makoto Suzuki served as communications officer aboard the transport Kumano Maru, responsible for coordinating rescue operations following submarine attacks. His previous experience had involved efficient crew evacuation procedures following standard submarine warning protocols. The concept of submarines attacking without warning seemed incompatible with civilized warfare, creating dangerous complacency that would prove fatal once American boats abandoned maritime conventions. The technological evolution of American torpedo warfare had achieved devastating effectiveness by mid-1942. Improved magnetic exploders had been replaced by reliable contact detonators that functioned consistently against merchant vessel hulls. Enhanced propulsion systems extended torpedo range while reducing acoustic signatures that might alert enemy vessels to incoming attacks. These technical improvements, combined with unrestricted warfare tactics, would create submarine capabilities that Japanese naval doctrine had never contemplated. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, commanding the combined fleet's carrier operations, had received fragmentary reports of increased American submarine activity throughout the Central Pacific. These reports suggested continuation of previous American tactics, emphasizing surface warnings and crew rescue operations. The possibility that enemy submarines had abandoned international maritime law seemed unlikely to an officer trained in naval tradition and honorable warfare. This fundamental misunderstanding of American tactical evolution would prove catastrophic for Japanese logistics operations. The geographic scope of unrestricted submarine warfare would encompass every major Japanese shipping route from the home islands to occupied territories. American submarines would establish patrol zones along critical supply lines, creating maritime choke points that would strangle Japanese war production. The systematic nature of this campaign would prove more devastating than isolated attacks, creating cumulative effects that would cripple Japanese military capabilities throughout the Pacific. Chief Petty Officer Jiro Tanaka commanded the anti-submarine warfare section aboard destroyer Yukikaze, responsible for protecting merchant convoys against enemy submarine attacks. His tactical training had emphasized engagement of surfaced submarines following international maritime protocols. Sonar operators had been trained to detect submarines running on the surface in preparation for warning procedures required by maritime law. These detection capabilities would prove inadequate against submarines attacking from submerged positions without prior warning. The intelligence coordination supporting American submarine operations had achieved unprecedented effectiveness through integration of code-breaking, reconnaissance, and operational planning. Submarine commanders received detailed target information, including cargo manifests, escort dispositions, and optimal attack positions. This intelligence support, combined with unrestricted warfare authority, would enable systematic destruction of Japanese shipping with efficiency that previous submarine campaigns had never achieved. Captain Masaki Kobayashi commanded the oil tanker Nishin Maru, carrying aviation fuel from Borneo refineries to airfields throughout the Central Pacific. His vessel had encountered American submarines on 4 previous occasions, each following predictable patterns of surface warning and crew evacuation. Standard abandonment procedures had proven effective in preserving crew lives while accepting cargo losses as inevitable costs of warfare. This tactical understanding would prove fatally obsolete once American submarines eliminated warning procedures. The strategic deception supporting unrestricted submarine warfare had been carefully managed to maintain Japanese assumptions about American tactical doctrine. Early submarine attacks continued to follow international maritime law to avoid alerting Japanese naval intelligence to the fundamental shift in American submarine operations. This deception would prove essential in maintaining the element of surprise that would make unrestricted warfare devastatingly effective against unprepared Japanese shipping. Lieutenant Commander David Patterson, commanding USS Stingray, operating in waters between Truk and the Marshall Islands where Japanese shipping had grown increasingly vulnerable to submarine attack. His previous patrols had achieved limited success against merchant targets due to restrictive rules of engagement that provided adequate warning for crew evacuation. The authorization for unrestricted warfare had fundamentally altered his tactical capabilities, enabling devastating attacks against unsuspecting Japanese vessels. The logistical implications of unrestricted submarine warfare would prove more decisive than surface naval engagements in determining the outcome of the Pacific War. Japanese military forces throughout occupied territories depended absolutely on seaborne supply lines that were increasingly vulnerable to submarine interdiction. The systematic destruction of merchant shipping would create cascading effects that would cripple Japanese defensive capabilities from the Central Pacific to Southeast Asia. As the sun climbed higher over the Coral Sea on that fateful morning in August 1942, Captain Tanaka aboard destroyer Hayabusa continued his methodical patrol, confident that American submarines would continue to operate according to the civilized conventions that had governed naval warfare for decades. What he could not have suspected was that beneath the placid waters, Lieutenant Commander Sullivan aboard USS Barracuda was preparing to demonstrate that the age of gentlemanly submarine warfare was ending, replaced by a campaign of unrestricted maritime warfare that would forever alter the balance of power in the Pacific. The rules of engagement that had protected Japanese shipping were about to be shattered by American submarines operating under new orders that recognized no distinction between military and civilian targets on the high seas. The first indication that American submarine warfare had fundamentally changed came at 03:47 hours on August 15, 1942, when 3 torpedoes from USS Barracuda struck the merchant vessel Kyoto Maru without any prior warning. The explosions ripped through the cargo ship's hull with devastating precision, detonating aviation fuel stored in her forward holds and creating a fireball that illuminated the pre-dawn darkness for miles. Captain Ichiro Fujiwara, commanding the vessel, had been reviewing cargo manifests in his cabin when the initial torpedo impact threw him against the bulkhead. There had been no submarine surfacing, no warning signals, no opportunity for orderly evacuation procedures that had characterized every previous encounter with American submarines. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan observed the destruction through USS Barracuda's periscope with grim satisfaction as secondary explosions tore apart the Japanese merchant vessel. The Mark 14 torpedoes had performed flawlessly, their contact exploders functioning with deadly reliability against the cargo ship's unarmored hull. The systematic nature of the attack represented a fundamental departure from previous American submarine tactics, eliminating the warning periods that had allowed Japanese crews to escape with their lives. This was warfare stripped of gentlemanly conventions, reduced to its most efficient and ruthless form. The radio distress calls from Kyoto Maru created immediate confusion among Japanese naval communications personnel monitoring emergency frequencies. Radioman First Class Kenji Yamada aboard the destroyer Hayabusa intercepted fragmentary transmissions describing submarine attack without warning, a tactical impossibility according to established American submarine doctrine. The concept of unrestricted submarine warfare seemed incompatible with previous enemy behavior, creating dangerous delays in emergency response procedures as communications officers struggled to comprehend the nature of the attack. Chief Petty Officer Saburo Nakamura, damage control supervisor aboard Kyoto Maru, had been awakened by the initial torpedo explosion and immediately began coordinating emergency procedures. His experience with previous submarine encounters had created confidence in standard damage control protocols, but the systematic nature of the American attack had eliminated time for effective countermeasures. The second and third torpedo impacts had flooded the engine room and ruptured fuel lines throughout the vessel, creating fires that spread faster than damage control parties could contain them. Captain Hideaki Tanaka aboard destroyer Hayabusa received the distress signals with growing alarm as he realized that American submarine tactics had evolved beyond Japanese anti-submarine warfare capabilities. His sonar operators had detected no surface contacts prior to the attack, suggesting that enemy submarines were now attacking from submerged positions without providing warning opportunities. This tactical evolution would require fundamental changes in escort procedures and merchant vessel protection protocols that Japanese naval doctrine had never contemplated. The psychological impact on surviving crew members from Kyoto Maru would spread throughout the Japanese merchant marine like a contagion of fear and uncertainty. Seaman Second Class Hiroshi Matsumoto, one of 37 survivors pulled from the burning waters, described the terror of facing torpedo attack without warning or opportunity for escape. His account emphasized the systematic nature of the American assault, with multiple torpedo impacts spaced to maximize destruction and minimize survival possibilities. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commanding the combined fleet from his flagship Yamato, received preliminary reports of the Kyoto Maru incident with growing concern about American submarine tactical evolution. The systematic nature of unrestricted warfare represented a strategic threat that Japanese anti-submarine capabilities were inadequately prepared to counter. Merchant shipping losses would accelerate beyond acceptable limits if American submarines abandoned maritime conventions that had previously limited their effectiveness against Japanese supply lines. Lieutenant Robert Chen aboard USS Barracuda calculated the tactical success of the unrestricted warfare attack with mechanical precision. 3 Mark 14 torpedoes had achieved complete target destruction within 17 minutes, eliminating a cargo vessel carrying critical aviation fuel and aircraft components. The elimination of warning procedures had increased torpedo effectiveness while reducing submarine vulnerability to escort counterattacks. This tactical efficiency would prove essential for systematic disruption of Japanese logistics operations throughout the Pacific. The strategic implications of unrestricted submarine warfare became apparent as additional American boats implemented similar tactics against Japanese shipping throughout the Central Pacific. USS Stingray, operating under Lieutenant Commander Patterson, achieved devastating success against the transport Osakara Maru, delivering 4 torpedo strikes that sank the vessel with all hands within 12 minutes. The systematic nature of these attacks suggested coordinated changes in American submarine doctrine rather than isolated tactical modifications. Captain Masaki Kobayashi, commanding the oil tanker Yishin Maru, had been awakened by urgent radio communications describing unrestricted submarine attacks against Japanese shipping. His vessel carried aviation fuel essential for maintaining air operations at forward bases throughout the Central Pacific, making it a prime target for enemy submarines operating under new tactical guidelines. The absence of warning procedures meant that traditional escape and evasion tactics would prove inadequate against submarines attacking without notice. Commander Yoshio Matsuda, analyzing submarine attack patterns from his position at Imperial Navy headquarters in Tokyo, recognized the fundamental shift in American submarine operations with growing alarm. Intelligence reports indicated systematic attacks against merchant shipping without adherence to international maritime law, suggesting that enemy submarines had received authorization for unrestricted warfare. This tactical evolution would require immediate countermeasures to prevent catastrophic shipping losses throughout Japanese supply lines. The technological advantages of submarine torpedo attacks became apparent as American submarines exploited the element of complete surprise against unsuspecting Japanese vessels. USS Barracuda's approach to the convoy carrying Nishin Maru demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of unrestricted warfare tactics. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan positioned his boat at optimal firing position without surfacing, eliminating acoustic signatures that might alert enemy sonar operators to submarine presence in the area. Petty Officer First Class Jiro Tanaka, operating sonar equipment aboard destroyer Yukakiza, had been trained to detect submarines preparing for surface attacks according to international maritime conventions. His detection capabilities proved inadequate against submarines maintaining submerged positions throughout their attack approaches. The acoustic signatures of underwater torpedo launches provided insufficient warning time for effective evasive maneuvers by targeted merchant vessels. The systematic destruction of Japanese merchant shipping accelerated throughout late 1942 as additional American submarines implemented unrestricted warfare tactics with devastating effectiveness. USS Wahoo under Lieutenant Commander Dudley Morton achieved spectacular success against convoy operations between Truk and the Marshall Islands, sinking 6 merchant vessels during a single patrol without providing warning opportunities for crew evacuation. These tactical successes validated the strategic decision to abandon maritime conventions in favor of maximum operational efficiency. Captain Tetsuo Hashimoto aboard heavy cruiser Sendai received urgent communications from merchant vessels under his escort reporting submarine attacks without warning. The systematic nature of American submarine operations suggested coordinated tactical changes that Japanese anti-submarine warfare doctrine was inadequately prepared to counter. Escort procedures would require fundamental modifications to protect merchant shipping against submarines operating under unrestricted warfare guidelines. The intelligence networks supporting American submarine operations provided detailed information about Japanese convoy schedules and cargo priorities, enabling systematic targeting of high-value vessels carrying critical war materials. Code-breaking operations had penetrated Japanese merchant marine communications, providing submarine commanders with advance warning of valuable targets and optimal attack opportunities. This intelligence advantage, combined with unrestricted warfare tactics, created submarine capabilities that Japanese logistics planners had never anticipated. Lieutenant Commander David Patterson aboard USS Stingray achieved devastating success against the cargo vessel Hiroshima Maru, delivering 3 torpedo strikes that detonated ammunition cargo and created explosions visible from 20 miles distance. The systematic nature of the attack, conducted without warning from optimal submerged position, demonstrated the tactical advantages of unrestricted submarine warfare against unsuspecting enemy vessels. These tactical successes would be replicated throughout the Pacific as American submarine commanders implemented new operational guidelines. The psychological warfare aspects of unrestricted submarine attacks proved as devastating as their physical effects on Japanese shipping operations. Merchant marine crews who had previously developed confidence in standard evacuation procedures faced the terror of unexpected torpedo strikes with no opportunity for escape. This psychological impact spread throughout the Japanese merchant marine, creating morale problems that compounded the material effects of accelerating shipping losses. Chief Engineer Makoto Suzuki aboard the transport Kumano Maru had been supervising machinery operations when torpedo explosions began tearing through his vessel's hull. His experience with previous submarine encounters had created expectations of warning periods that would allow orderly evacuation procedures, but the American attack provided no such opportunities. The systematic destruction of his ship's engineering spaces eliminated power and propulsion within minutes, trapping crew members below decks as the vessel settled rapidly by the stern. The tactical coordination between American submarines operating in overlapping patrol zones created comprehensive coverage of Japanese shipping routes that proved impossible to evade through traditional navigation methods. USS Barracuda and USS Stingray maintained communication protocols that enabled coordinated attacks against large convoys. with individual boats assigned specific targets to maximize destruction while minimizing mutual interference. This tactical coordination multiplied the effectiveness of unrestricted warfare beyond the capabilities of individual submarine operations. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, commanding carrier operations for the combined fleet, received detailed reports of accelerating merchant shipping losses with growing recognition that American submarines had achieved tactical superiority through abandonment of maritime conventions. The systematic nature of unrestricted warfare represented a strategic threat that Japanese naval capabilities were inadequately equipped to counter. Anti-submarine warfare doctrine would require fundamental revisions to address enemy submarines operating without adherence to international law. The technological evolution of American torpedo warfare had achieved devastating reliability through elimination of magnetic exploder problems and improvement of contact detonation systems. Mark 14 torpedoes launched from submerged positions achieved consistent target destruction against Japanese merchant vessels, eliminating the technical failures that had plagued early submarine operations. These improved weapons, combined with unrestricted warfare tactics, created submarine capabilities that previous Pacific War engagements had never demonstrated. Lieutenant Robert Chen calculated the tactical effectiveness of unrestricted submarine warfare with mechanical precision, as USS Barracuda achieved systematic destruction of Japanese shipping throughout her patrol area. The elimination of warning procedures had increased torpedo accuracy while reducing submarine vulnerability to escort counterattacks. These tactical advantages enabled individual submarines to achieve destruction rates that previous submarine operations conducted under international maritime law had never approached. The logistical impact of unrestricted submarine warfare began cascading throughout Japanese military operations as critical supplies failed to reach forward bases and occupied territories. Aviation fuel shortages grounded aircraft throughout the Central Pacific, while ammunition shortages limited defensive preparations against anticipated Allied amphibious assaults. The systematic destruction of merchant shipping proved more effective than surface naval engagements in crippling Japanese military capabilities across the entire Pacific theater. Captain Hiroshi Yamamoto aboard destroyer Asashio coordinated desperate anti-submarine operations as American boats systematically destroyed merchant vessels under his protection. His anti-submarine warfare training had emphasized engagement of surfaced submarines following international protocols, leaving him inadequately prepared for enemies attacking from submerged positions without warning. The tactical evolution of American submarine operations had rendered traditional escort procedures obsolete almost overnight. The strategic deception maintaining Japanese assumptions about American submarine doctrine began collapsing as accumulating evidence demonstrated systematic abandonment of maritime conventions. Intelligence analysts at Imperial Navy headquarters recognized that enemy submarines had received authorization for unrestricted warfare, fundamentally altering the tactical situation in Pacific shipping lanes. This recognition would prove too late to prevent the catastrophic shipping losses that were already crippling Japanese logistics operations. Ensign Takeshi Watanabe, surviving the destruction of transport vessel Nagoya Maru, provided detailed testimony regarding the systematic nature of American attacks, conducted without warning or rescue provisions. His account emphasized the psychological impact of facing invisible enemies who struck without notice, creating terror that spread throughout Japanese merchant marine personnel. These psychological effects compounded the physical destruction of shipping, creating cascading impacts on Japanese war production and military logistics. The technological superiority of American submarine operations became apparent as coordinated attacks systematically destroyed Japanese convoys throughout the Central Pacific. USS Wahoo, USS Barracuda, and USS Stingray achieved devastating success through implementation of unrestricted warfare tactics that eliminated warning procedures and maximized target destruction. These tactical successes validated strategic decisions to abandon maritime conventions in favor of maximum operational efficiency against Japanese supply lines. Commander William Barnes, executive officer aboard USS Barracuda, observed the systematic destruction of Japanese shipping with professional satisfaction, as unrestricted warfare tactics achieved unprecedented effectiveness. The elimination of surface warnings and rescue provisions had increased submarine operational capabilities while reducing vulnerability to escort counterattacks. These tactical advantages enabled individual boats to achieve destruction rates that previous submarine operations conducted under international maritime law had never approached. The logistical impact of unrestricted submarine warfare began cascading throughout Japanese military operations as critical supplies failed to reach forward bases and occupied territories. Aviation fuel shortages grounded aircraft throughout the Central Pacific, while ammunition shortages limited training exercises and combat readiness. The systematic destruction of merchant shipping proved more effective than surface naval engagements in crippling Japanese military capabilities across the entire Pacific theater. Captain Hiroshi Yamamoto aboard destroyer Asashio coordinated desperate anti-submarine operations as American boats systematically destroyed merchant vessels under his protection. His anti-submarine warfare training had emphasized engagement of surfaced submarines following international protocols, leaving him inadequately prepared for enemies attacking from submerged positions without warning. The tactical evolution of American submarine operations had rendered traditional escort procedures obsolete almost overnight. The strategic deception maintaining Japanese assumptions about American submarine doctrine began collapsing as accumulating evidence demonstrating systematic abandonment of maritime conventions. Intelligence analysts at Imperial Navy headquarters recognized that enemy submarines had received authorization for unrestricted warfare, fundamentally altering the tactical situation in Pacific shipping lanes. This recognition would prove too late to prevent the catastrophic shipping losses that were already crippling Japanese logistics operations. Ensign Takeshi Lazanabe, surviving the destruction of transport vessel Nagoya Maru, provided detailed testimony regarding the systematic American attacks conducted without warning or rescue provisions. His account emphasized the psychological impact of facing invisible enemies who struck without notice, creating terror that spread throughout Japanese merchant marine personnel. These psychological effects compounded the physical destruction of shipping, creating cascading impacts on Japanese war production and military logistics. The technological superiority of American submarine operations became apparent as coordinated attacks systematically destroyed Japanese convoys throughout the Central Pacific. USS Wahoo, USS Barracuda, and USS Stingray achieved devastating success through implementation of unrestricted warfare tactics that eliminated warning procedures and maximized target destruction. These tactical successes validated strategic decisions to abandon maritime conventions in favor of maximum operational efficiency against Japanese supply lines. Commander William Barnes, executive officer aboard USS Barracuda, observed the systematic destruction